Our next presentation is from Chris Moore. Chris is a product designer at the robo-advisor company Betterment. Chris encourages us to design products that are more inclusive and that account for the diverse set of experiences that represent the entire constituency we all serve. So I'm very excited to introduce Chris Moore.
Hey y'all, my name is Chris and I'm on the product design team over at Betterment. I've been at Betterment a little over a year and I've been working specifically in various design capacities for the last 7 or so years. Really excited to be speaking here today on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So for my talk today, I'm going to tell you all a little bit about who I am, how that impacts me as a designer. From there, we'll look at a case study from the work that I've been involved in at Betterment, and then we'll wrap up with some things that we've learned on our journey toward making a truly inclusive product for a diverse audience. So let's dive in. So I wanted to share with you all today some aspects of my identity that motivates me as a human and as a designer. I'm a neurotypical gender nonconforming individual with an invisible disability. It's quite a mouthful. So what that looks like is that I have ADD. I don't really look like a boy or a girl. I have to manage symptoms for PTSD and anxiety. And as difficult as it can be, I like to be open and transparent about that stuff. And like most user experience designers, I have an interest in human behavior and psychology. Understanding who I am helps me understand my users and generate more compassion and empathy. I bring a very clearly non-normative perspective and insight into certain demographics. And this I found is my superpower. So I've shown you all some of the marginalized aspects of my identity, but on the flip side, I also hold an enormous amount of privilege. I'm white, able-bodied, and don't have to worry too much about money or getting my needs met. By default, I don't have to think about my safety when I'm pulled over for speeding. I can expect to feel a sense of belonging, for the most part, in images I see that in movies, on websites, commercials, ads. I don't have to worry about whether or not I can physically enter a building or access a website. I can afford my groceries to be delivered to me during a pandemic. And I have unfettered access to healthcare. I can pay for my therapy out of pocket. I can spend the whole talk talking about my knapsack of privilege. My hope is that you'll start, if you haven't already, to think about how your identity informs your design process. And then especially if you're a leader in your organization, to find ways to motivate your team to do just that. So let's take a look at how some of this started to play out at Betterment. So when I joined Betterment, I almost immediately became a squeaky wheel, always bringing up issues of accessibility and inclusivity. And what that really means to me is that Betterment was a safe place to give that feedback. So I felt comfortable enough to bring up those issues that are really uncomfortable. And that even though I had to put in a ton of labor, my colleagues and leadership were able to receive that feedback. As I had mentioned before, gender is an important aspect of my identity. So naturally, places in our app were that not inclusive in that way stood out to me immediately. So I think of this as a single case study, but it really kind of comes in 2 parts. Part 1 of the study consists of where and why we ask users what their sex, often mislabeled as gender, is. And it's kind of the first step toward an inclusive UI in our platform. The UI for gender in our app lived in a sign-up flow, and it was kind of as you would expect. There are input fields for name, address, phone, date of birth, but radios for gender. So why radios? Why not input fields or drop-downs or checkboxes? I can almost certainly guarantee that those inputs were chosen because of an implicit bias that gender, again, it's really just sex, is binary, that you're either male or female. And sure, there may be some other variations out there, but statistically speaking, it's a small percentage. And we really should just focus on not confusing our target demographic. And I want to read you all this piece of customer feedback. Hi, Betterment. I was excited to create an account for you, but I'm rethinking because of your required gender question on account setup. I'm non-binary. I don't identify with male or female. And also, those are biological designations, not genders. I suggest that you either don't make this a required question or you change your options. You're totally erasing trans and non-binary people who, like me, had the potential to be customers of yours. I also don't really understand why this information would be required, as it does not directly relevant or to the type of service that you're offering. This isn't a health problem. I appreciate your attention to this matter. In the meantime, I'll be looking into other brokerage account options. So here we have a customer that's taken the time to write into us and tell us that they'll be moving on from a Betterment platform because we are actively collecting data, one that excludes them, but Two, we're not even doing a good job of explaining why we're collecting that data. And as my colleague, Jess Harrelson, who's someone I worked a lot with on these projects as an engineer, really pointed out that, these folks are the canaries in the coal mine. And so they point directly to what we're missing as a company when we start to ask questions like, how do we reach our KPIs in customer acquisition? How do we increase sign-up rate? Why are folks dropping out on this page in this particular flow? When really the answer is here, almost hidden in plain sight. Our job as designers is to connect people. So I'm paraphrasing this, but this was from my first design mentor at Comcast, Sabrina Fletcher, and she gave me an understanding of what it meant to be a designer in an organization. My job was to talk to people. And since then, I've probably spent just as much time in Slack and on Zoom as I have in either Figma or Sketch. So with respect to gender radios, I got curious and started asking around, why do we ask this question? Why are they radios? Can we update these questions? Or can we even remove them? I read customer CX responses to customers. I spoke with GMs, other designers and other engineers, and I spoke with my VP. I wasn't really satisfied until I had an understanding of why we were doing this in the way that we were doing it. And like most things, there's a reason. And I came across a few reasons that ended up not being quite so accurate. So one answer I got was we're required by law. Okay, well, which law? The Patriot Act. So that sounded very scary, but I actually took the time to look this up, came across a lot of legalese, and then reached out to a friend of mine that was a lawyer, and we kind of figured out that, the Patriot Act in this context really doesn't require us to ask that question. Okay, so back to the drawing board. So then why do we require this question? Ideology was kind of, the next thing that most people said, and that's our identity vendor. Another answer that I got was it was required for tax purposes. Come to find out, none of these were really the case. The reason we were asking this question is because sex in this context can affect how we give advice to our customers in our platform. After all, we are a robo-advisor. For example, we might offer different retirement advice to a woman in her 30s than we would a man at the same age. And research had proven that out. But what about non-binary intersex folk? How do we give them advice when we're only looking at research for male and female? I was able to find out this information because I had an awesome manager who happened to be the VP of design. He was in a position to kind of track down these answers. And not only did he have the institutional knowledge, because I'd only been at Betterment for about a month at that point, but he had the privilege to ask folks those questions, the folks in power. He was a really great ally for this cause and this issue. And this Slack here that I have on the screen is in response to an update from him that we were going to go ahead and move forward with just removing the gender radios from our sign-up flow completely. The advice team wasn't using that information at all. They may in the future, but at this point, we can decide to remove it. About a month later, a colleague on my team merged the pull request that removed the 12 lines of code from our app. I never once opened Figma or Sketch for this design change, and it was still maybe the highlight of my career. What Sabina told me years earlier really rang true for me in that moment. The craft that I had started to hone over the years was more than mastering Photoshop or different UX patterns, but really it was about learning how to engage with other humans on something that I felt really passionate and vulnerable about. So a month or so after that pull request got merged, I got a Slack from Jess. That Slack said, I really want to build out preferred names and pronouns into our sign-up flow. Been bugging some people about it recently, so I can keep you updated if you're interested. Hell yes. The second part of this case study on inclusive design is really about getting a feature that solves problems for a marginalized group of folks onto a product roadmap. We were two gender nonconforming individuals, more than happy to put in the work to do this project, but really what we were interested in is how do we get the organization as a whole to care about this issue? And Jess really drove that aspect of the initiative. So Jess started reaching out to other engineers, setting up meetings. I started digging around in Zendesk, and there was plenty of feedback from our customers over the last couple of years. This is one that particularly stood out. Hi, I'm trans and waiting on paperwork for a legal name change. I had to use my legal name for account sign up, which is currently still my dead name. I work in tech. I know systems can be very limiting, but it would make me very happy if I could change the name I see on emails and when logging in to be my name. It's a little hard stab every time I see my dead name. It's a long shot, but I thought I'd ask. That line, it's a little hard stab every time I see my dead name, really affected me and I think a lot of folks in the company. So this email was sent back in August 2019. Jess sent that initial Slack to me where I responded, hell yes, back in January of this year. 8 or so months later, Jess was able to flip on the feature flag, and we had a solutions out in the wild to users for them to put in their preferred name. And this wasn't something that we had like back channeled or worked off the side of our desk between projects. It's something that made it onto a roadmap that got scoped and had resources thrown at it. So what ensued in that 8 months is hard to distill down and represent quantitatively. Countless Slacks, copy docs, Asana tickets, design studios, meetings, Figma updates. From that perspective, it wasn't really any different from any other designer's process. But for me as a genderqueer person, I was experiencing that project on a level that's not quantifiable. So imagine, if you will, a very concerned Slack bot sends you an automated message that says, howdy, over the last year, 1 million messages, 500,000 of which were emotional labor on behalf of your colleagues. Emotional labor is to be expected in any organization. Of course, we'd all love to have organizations a space where we can all show up being ourselves without having to educate or to apologize to anyone. I think it's important to name specifically what I'm talking about. And this is a bit of a prelude to some of my takeaways that let's get specific. In an organization and field of mostly white, straight, cisgender men, there are a lot of folks that are going to have to do emotional labor on various levels. A Black person is going to be exhausted from the countless microaggressions that they're getting in and outside of work. A gender nonconforming person is going to be tired from having to constantly explain their pronouns. But if we understand the various aspects of our identities and how that shapes our worldviews, we can, begin to understand how to engage with that material in an authentic way. It already informs our practices as designers, but now we can start to have influence over that. Okay, so now let's take a look at what we designed. So we had scoped the project in a way that would make the most immediate impact. We wanted to stop dead naming our customers wherever we could. Those places included things like emails, in-app salutations, and whenever our CX folk would, answer a phone call or, respond to an email. So the low-hanging fruit here that would also kind of stop the bleeding, so to speak, was adding in a flow from our settings page that would allow users to tell us their preferred name. So when you click preferred name CTA, it launches the user into a flow. And there were two things that we wanted to accomplish here. One was to allow the customer to have full autonomy and empowerment on the information that they gave us, but also make it very clear that we will be saving their legal name and how and why and when. So upon initial release, felt pretty clear that our mental model was that a preferred name and a legal name. So once the user hit update, they were met with a confirmation screen. And this was hopefully a moment of delight for our customer, the moment where for the first time we address them as the name that they go by. We also included some relevant FAQs that provided the customer with context around, why we had to use legal name, if at all, and where we had to use it. So maybe my favorite part of the project was deciding on how we actually display the legal name once the user goes through that flow. We knew we had to, but we didn't want anyone to feel those little stabs in their heart when they see their dead name. Like, what do they even need to see their dead name, if at all, as much as possible or not? We already have a pattern of hiding and showing sensitive information. Most financial apps do, especially with things like account numbers. So the toggle was a no-brainer. It protected the customer, empowered them, but it also kind of gave them context to let them know that we retained their legal name. So with the feature flag flipped, Jess and I drafted up and sent out a personalized email blast to the folks who had written in over the years. We let them know that we get it, that we took some action, we built the first step toward a solution, and that they should go check it out. It felt really good to write out this personalized email to these specific customers who had written to us. And we got tons of feedback. Some of the feedback we got, I really, really appreciate this. This has been the only company in the past 4 years of me going through my transition that has acknowledged and took accountability for the trauma it can cause going through the name changes. I'm glad this feature is now available, and it shows that Betterment isn't just using lip service to show they are committed to diversity and inclusion. Another one. Wow, thank you so much for following up and executing. Thank you for acknowledging the struggles of changing legal names and making an effort to financial services more accessible to trans and non-binary on both a practical and emotional level. I've always been happy with Betterment's products and customer service, but this is truly exemplary. So for folks that don't know, changing your legal name is incredibly difficult. It involves, you have to often go, depending on the state, you have to go before a judge. It can be expensive. You have to publish, and sometimes in two different newspapers. So Jess and I, as being non-binary folk or trans folk, like really understood that that's a difficult process. And so we were really able to relate to these users on that level. We also got feedback from people internally. And so I found this super surprising, but super awesome that seeing, a lot of the feedback from largely cisgender straight white guys and the joy that being able to put in the name that they prefer to go by caused them was just really awesome. It really proved out this whole thesis to me of inclusive design, is that inclusive design is design for everyone. In his book, Designing for Emotion, Aaron Walter writes, by using design to make our customers feel seen, we create a deep emotional engagement. When people feel a sense of belonging, they'll give you repeat business and they'll tell others. I think the Preferred Names Project and the feedback that we got from customers, we proved out this maxim. Inclusive design is the right thing to do, and it's also good for business. We also got some constructive criticism. And to be honest, I was a little salty when I read this. After all, I was very proud of myself, and Jess and I had put in a ton of work along with a lot of other folks. I'll go ahead and read that now. My legal name is whatever it is, and that makes using the dead name even more egregious. It isn't merely preferred, it's my damn name. My name is correct when I log in. You just continue to send me emails to my dead name. This is just a matter of pure laziness. So of course, we are in conversation with that customer, trying to understand the emails that are going back and forth to make sure that we didn't miss something, that we are appropriately addressing this person by what their name is and should be. But there was another piece of feedback in here that really resonated and stood out to both Jess and myself that we had thought about before, but kind of pushed off to the side, was this idea of, preferred name. Yeah, it's your name. So even though we were a little skeptical, we kind of moved forward anyway. But we're now going to take a second pass, so to speak, at that, and just incorporate that feedback. So it's ongoing, but our first fast follow will be to move toward conceptualizing the Preferred Name Project as just, and preferred name as just name. So, legal name then becomes this secondary thing that is othered. So also shout out to the brave compliant folks that are going to hopefully allow us to work in this method. Okay, so that's some insight into our journey. What are some takeaways? Who doesn't love takeaways, especially at a high level? One, start where you are. What is your Venn diagram of identity look like? What does your teams look like? Are your senior level designers cisgender men? Probably. It's going to affect your design. It's already affected your design, and that's inevitable. But if you ask these questions and you start where you are, you can start to understand how your identities will exclude some of your users, and from there you'll be able to shift your design thinking. Once we've taken stock of who we are, don't waste time judging, shaming, or feeling guilty about the privilege that you hold. We're all born into a heteronormative, transphobic society that privileges white bodies, oppresses, murders, subjugates Black, brown, and other bodies. We aren't responsible for the conditions with which we're socially constructed, but we are responsible for our actions once we become aware of what motivates them. Use your privilege for good. You can support efforts of marginalized coworkers, promote underrepresented folks. You can give feedback to your colleagues when they say or do something offensive. And get specific. It's really easy to hide behind words like inclusive or diverse. But when we talk about making finance apps inclusive, what do we really mean? Inclusive of who? Diverse from what? What we really mean is we want to make our apps for folks who aren't just white straight men. The more specific we get with our language, the more that we begin to understand what our blind spots are. So when I started thinking about doing this talk, I started to really question what it was that I had to say that was unique, that hadn't already been said. We've all read Medium articles, watched talks, seen various handbooks. We know what inclusive design is, but the thing that I kept circling around, the question that I kept asking myself, really had to do with the audience of this conference. What would I like to say, as a non-binary product designer to VPs and senior leaders at design and product teams? So number one, hire Black people. Seems self-explanatory, but really hire Black people. I belabor this point because without Black designers on our teams, we have really huge blind spots. Makes me think of this quote by advertiser Tom Burrell: Black people are not dark-skinned white people. So this quote so articulately called out the false assumptions that white marketers had about Black demographics they were targeting back in the day. It also really still applies to today as, as brand designers, UI designers, and most of us are white and often Southeast Asian. We have the same faulty assumption. Promote Black folks in your organization. Give them power and pay them well. They are working way harder than anyone else on your team. And like I mentioned at the onset of this talk, Betterment was able to handle tough questions that I started to relentlessly ask. They made space for me. So, make your organization a safe space. Educate yourself and be prepared to make that space for folks with different needs and different outlooks. So number 5 is to ask yourself constantly, what's the worst case scenario and on whom? And this is pulled directly from Project Inkblock's Designing for Diversity framework. If you don't know their work, you absolutely should. This foundational question is something that you can put into your design and product development process that will move your designs and products towards harm reduction. 6, promote collaboration. This one's pretty simple. A healthy organization is a collaborative one. 7, respect emotional labor. It's real and it takes a toll. 8, prepare for the long haul. So this work is a marathon of sprints of sprints of sprints. That's going to take a lifetime. So just keep moving. 9, solve for one, extend to many. Who is your most vulnerable customer? If you solve for them, then everyone's going to reap the benefits. And lastly, be fearless. It can be scary to start asking a ton of questions in your organization, especially in the fintech industry. We are, obligated by scary things like the IRS, the Patriot Act, consumer fraud. But what I found, there's always a solution to the question, how do we make everyone feel welcome? Even if it's just copy explaining why we need to do something, it's a start. And the important thing really is just to start. And if you've started, just keep going, friend. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to my talk. And that's it.
Just bear with that. It makes me happy.
Yeah, I love it.
Chris, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Really interesting topic, a very current topic that we hear a lot about when we're talking to our clients, and we certainly are thinking about inclusive design at an agency. I do have some questions here that I'd love to filter in over to you. So uh, let's start with the short one first. Any perspective on how inclusive design can improve financial well-being? Maybe a link there. Maybe a tough one I just gave you.
Yeah. I feel like
Did
that's
not
kind of
mean to.
that's the core question. I think that a lot of us over at Betterment are tackling from all angles, not just design, but operations and legal and all of it. I think so anyone, I think, from my perspective, it's like if I come to an experience as my whole self, that is well-being in itself. If I have to exclude a part of who I am to kind of fit, maybe a gender radio or something like that, that is immediately kind of taxing on my well-being. So I think it's a lot of, in the beginning, kind of micro decisions that add up over time.
Yeah, you took that sort of where my mind goes. It's a low trust category, right? So there's low trust to begin with in financial services, and if you're holding anything back, or if you feel like that relationship is less genuine or less complete or less whole, as you were saying, then it's not going to be as high trust as you want it to be as a financial services company, and you could probably use that as a proxy for you're going to participate less and you'll get less benefit and all of that. So yeah, good
Absolutely.
point there. I'll get a couple more here. Let me see. Let's go with this one. Given the nature of the Betterment product in ensuring the client security and the protection of their account and assets, while being sensitive to gender and identity, how do you avoid or work around the questions that under normal circumstances are used to protect them? So it's a long question there, and I know you talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced at Betterment with some of the regulatory pushback. So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, with Betterment, we know we have a couple of different products. So one of the first place we started was kind of the easiest place, which is our retail product. And as I'd mentioned, like we had, behavioral finance that kind of wants to use that information but wasn't using it yet. So the easiest thing and kind of the safest thing was just to pull it out until we could responsibly use that in a way that was inclusive. But however, we have a B4B product which deals with 401ks, where that's by the EEOC we are required to collect gender based upon a binary system. So that's something that's still in progress, and it's something that even plan managers have often requested. Can I change this or specify something different? So it's just a matter of getting back to that kind of advocacy of folding that stuff into the roadmap.
Excellent. And one more question here. Um, I think overall the reaction to your talk was very positive. And the question here is really, uh, does your effort open up further opportunities for universal design? For example, designing for folks that don't yet have money to invest. Uh, Also, how do you deal with any of the naysayers? So kind of a two-part question there.
Yeah, I guess I would need clarity on the naysayers, but I could probably answer the universal. I mean, that's my hope, and I think a lot of people that are at Betterment and that kind of find themselves in finance, at least someone like me who's like, that's the last place I would have expected to find myself. That's what I find
Mm-hmm.
really interesting, really exciting is, how do we democratize this in a way that's really we're democratizing it and distilling it down from people who make six figures to even less, and really promoting financial health across all classes. How do we smash capitalism within a capitalist system? I think some of us are thinking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the naysayers, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess maybe to put a finer point on it too. Awareness is the beginning of all change, right? So just driving some of that awareness in any of these organizations, the companies that have joined us today, that's a great place. I like where you ended your talk, which is how to get started. Well, get started. I think that's a really good message for folks. So, Chris, thanks so much for being here. I hope you can hang out for some of the rest of the program. So, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was awesome.